And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Here in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Let's get right to it. Joining me on the line right now is someone that I think everyone in Rhode Island knows and knows well. And of course I'm talking about former Representative Aaron Regunberg. He was kind enough to join us in between, well, a hectic, crazy day. A few weeks ago, we had the pleasure of having folks from Never Again Action Rhode Island on, and they talked about their mission, their core belief system, and I found that, quite frankly, their attitude about refugees, folks seeking citizenship in this country, dovetailed nicely with my own. I firmly believe in the right of man and woman to live wheresoever they choose. I firmly believe in the property rights of the individual to host those, regardless of territorial boundaries drawn, whether it be 1,000 years ago or, in this case, maybe 200 years ago. It speaks to our culture right now, how we treat folks looking to join us here in the United States. I personally have traveled to Mexico and the border and have met with folks who, quite frankly, I consider patriots. They have literally put their lives at risk so they could join us here in the United States, pursuing, well, what every family does, however that family is constructed. They're looking for a future for their children. They're looking for personal liberty. They're looking for safety. So when I began to read about Never Again Action, I was impressed. Folks drawing on their own personal religious beliefs, their own religious history, and applying those lessons, if you will, to what many believe is the beginning of a dangerous period here in the United States, where, if this sounds familiar, let me know, where individuals are villainized, perhaps because of their religion, perhaps because of their culture, or in this case, perhaps because of the color of their skin or where they are from. And these folks have been willing to do something that most aren't, which is to, quite frankly, leave their comfort zone. And I mean leave their comfort zone, to protest on behalf of people, in many cases they've never met. And I'm talking about the ongoing protests at the Wyatt Detention Center here in Rhode Island, a for-profit prison that is, quite frankly, paying the bills, if you will, on the backs of folks trying to come to this country. It's disgusting, and I'm glad that someone is stepping up and saying, well, never again. Aaron, thank you for joining us on the show. I think this is the first time that we've been together like this. And again, I appreciate you taking time on a hectic Friday night to join me.
Pat, I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation, and I really appreciated how you just articulated that I agree. What could be more American, right, than this commitment to the values of this country, that folks are willing to take that risk to try to seek a better life for their families, some more freedom and security for their family. And again, almost all of us got here in that exact same way because our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents were willing to take that same risk because they felt that same love and dream of something better.
Right. It's well, quite frankly, it's as human as it gets. We are ultimately all created in the same manner. We all want the same things for our family. And the notion that some arbitrarily drawn line will dictate for your future and for your forevermore, if you will, the right to have a shot at that life of liberty and that pursuit of happiness, if I can quote the founding fathers, is just, well, plain nuts. So it's been a challenging few months for you folks. How long? Well, first of all, describe your role, if you will, with the organization, because you are one of a handful of public figures who everyone recognizes and now associates with the movement. So, what's your role?
So I'm an enthusiastic member and sort of volunteer organizer. I think you did a good job of explaining a little bit about what Never Again is. It's really this movement that sprung up organically this summer across the country of Jews alongside immigrants and allies of all faiths who we're coming together to say we cannot stand on the sidelines anymore. We need to take some action about the attacks that we are seeing against our immigrant brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. And I think for so many of us, myself included, the importance and urgency of that fight is really informed by our own, personal family history. For me, my grandfather was born in Germany in 1930, and he became a refugee from the Holocaust. He was very lucky he survived. Most of his family did not. And growing up as a kid, when he, and often he did not want to share stories, but when he did share stories about his experiences, the thing that always, confused and disturbed me the most was thinking about his neighbors, the people in his town who he grew up with, who were willing to watch that escalating state-sponsored violence against their neighbors and do nothing. And so I think all of us who are involved in this believe very strongly that that sentence that we as Jews grew up hearing, never again, that's not just sort of a throwaway line, right? That's a promise. And it means to keep that promise, it means that we have to do what I wish, the folks in my grandfather's town had done, which was to stand up and put their bodies on the line and do what they could to protect folks that were in the target, that were vulnerable. So that's sort of what Never Again's been doing here in Rhode Island. We've been focused specifically on trying to fight the operation of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, which has a real footprint here. The Wyatt prison, which, as you said, is the one non-public prison in the state, has a contract with ICE to serve as an ICE detention center. And so asylum seekers, folks who have committed no crime, but as you said at the top of the show, seeking some security and a better life for their families, are being kept there in conditions that, there's reports sound really inhumane. This is a prison that someone died at because of the terrible conditions and violence back in 2008 and 9. And for us, we're saying that if we want Rhode Island to not be complicit in these attacks, these policies against immigrants, then we need to stand up and say we're going to do everything we can to kick ICE out of our state.
And just as an observation, it should be pointed out that the Wyatt Detention Center was literally on a financial life support until they decided to accept the blood money of ICE and the federal government to imprison people who merely are seeking a better life. And, in a sense, they're being artificially resuscitated on a daily basis by yours and my tax dollars. And I'm trying to keep it polite here, I'll use the term misguided. I think you could probably tell I feel a lot more strongly, but a misguided approach to law enforcement. And the facility itself has been uniquely troubled. There have been escapes. The folks who work there are paid a substandard wage. And on top of that, to make it even worse, there's little or no training being provided to a lot of these security officers. So you've got an operation being run poorly on the cheap, making blood money off the life, if you will, of people who are merely seeking, again, a better life. It's outrageous.
And that's a point to really underline, right? We're paying for this. Right. It's hard to say, oh, that's not my problem. I don't have anything to do with that. I'm not complicit in that. When it's our tax dollars that are making that happen. It's under our flag. It is just taking the morality out of it, just putting on your sort of economic efficiency hat. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible use of public resources. Mm-hmm. These are not people that we should be spending so much locking away. And then of course we have to put our moral hat back on, because that's really what the crisis is.
Right. And again, there is nothing immoral, I should say, about people being imprisoned merely because of the actions of their birth. And so we come, of course, to the events that were replayed again this weekend. And let me just ask one other question before I forget. Other states are starting to respond, if you will, to ICE. And other states, you're starting to see a momentum build for folks kicking ICE out, if you will, saying no mas. And does that embolden the folks? I mean, hopefully that gives you folks some, emotional support there that the rest of the country at least is responding.
Emotional support and very clear sort of policy models, right? California just last month passed legislation to ban the operation of private prisons and detention centers. It's going to lead to the shuttering of the 4 main ICE detention centers in that state. New Jersey just a week and a half ago put out a new executive order that bans any local or state law enforcement from signing contracts with ICE like they have at the Wyatt. Just to name 2, there are a number of states that are stepping up. And here in Rhode Island, what we're trying to say is that our state leaders need to step up too. We heard after the 2016 election, and we heard again, around election time in 2018, a number of our state leaders saying, we're gonna fight back against these policies from the Trump administration. We're going to protect our immigrant neighbors. But here we are. ICE is operating in our state, and we could take action at the state level, but our leaders are not. So that's a problem. What we're arguing is that is not in line with the promise of never again. Putting ourselves back in the past in times when state-sponsored violence has targeted vulnerable communities. We know how important it is that we use every tool at our disposal to stop that before it gets worse, and we know how bad it can get. So we're pushing for the governor, for legislative leaders to really step up. We were very excited that 2 weeks ago, Governor Raimondo responded to one of our demands, which is around passing legislation to ban for-profit private prisons in Rhode Island. We've got the Wyatt, which is this weird sort of quasi-public-private thing, and we know that the bondholders who are controlling the Wyatt right now through UMB Bank, which is this billion-dollar bank out of Missouri, they are actually trying to sell the Wyatt to, if you can imagine a worse situation with even less public accountability, they're trying to sell it to one of the national for-profit prison corporations. There's 3 big ones that have, over the last decade and a half, made billions and billions of our taxpayer dollars, because again, every one of these dollars is coming from us, creating these unaccountable for-profit prisons. So they want to bring that here in Rhode Island. So we're fighting that, among other things, and we're starting to see a response from our leaders, which is exciting. I think it's a result of folks really stepping up and saying, we're not going to give up. We're going to keep coming back. We're going to keep bugging you. We're going to keep forcing this issue until we get a response. But there's a lot more to do.
And if I can give you a little bit of tip, UMB Bank is a fascinating story because it's one of those financial institutions that's kind of quietly there. And most folks, they've never heard of it. There's certainly no UMB banks at the Stop and Shop, and they're not going to run into one down in Centerville or anywhere here, or if they're in Boston. It's one of those quiet corporate-style banks. I'm going to give you a little tip if you want to have some fun and create another pressure point. But it's just between you and me. So guess who one of UMB's bank's biggest customers is?
Please tell me.
Fidelity. Fidelity uses UMB Bank as their corresponding bank for almost all or a significant part of their cash management, essentially cash checking accounts. If you have a Fidelity account, hypothetically, speaking for a friend, and you look at your check, it'll say UMB Bank of Missouri. So just kind of throw that out there. That's my travel tip for today, Aaron. How about that?
I appreciate that, and I might want to follow up with you off the on that at some point.
Yeah, it's kind of sign on to the coalition every Friday night from 6 to 9, and we'll give you a variety of fun facts and trivia that'll improve the quality of your life. Now, of course, we had Mr. Eden a couple weeks ago. He was great and really gave us a background. And at the time, I really didn't want to focus so much on the incident, if you will. It was still being discussed amongst the law enforcement community. And the goal here is not to provide, if you heard my intro, our tagline is that we are outrage porn free. Not interested in ginning up emotions, pitting people against each other. There's enough of that crap that happens here in Rhode Island anyway. We need to find ways to get people to, well, that's why we call it the coalition, to get people to, agree on what they agree on and work on that for the time being. And we will get pissed off at each other later about something else. But ultimately, it came to a head this week. The Attorney General announced that after a grand jury was convened, there were no charges going forward. And your reaction was pronounced and quite to the point. And I wonder if you could just discuss that a little bit. And I know we don't have we're pressing your time here, but just give us your reflection on that. And coincidentally, as you made public earlier this year that you're attending law school, and there's a lot of chaos and confusion about this. I think the Attorney General tried to do a good job explaining. I'm going to take the high road here, but there's confusion over a couple issues. First of all, the sheer outrageousness of it, and number two, is it in fact legal now for prison guards or, well, quite frankly, anyone in law enforcement to just simply, at will, try and take out a crowd? Because I quite frankly, I share a lot of your feelings. What's your thoughts?
So, we were, I think disappointed isn't a strong enough word,
right,
to share sort of the emotions that went through the Never Again group, the folks who were participants in this, who were there on August 14th. I think there's really three issues that we feel is really outrageous about this. The first is the way that this investigation was conducted. The demonstrators, the folks who were there, who participated in the grand jury investigation as witnesses to what happened that night, with, I think I can say, unanimity, and that's not a word that you can use very often, but across the board, left their grand jury witness testimony feeling completely demoralized and frustrated, and there were people in tears by the sense that they got that this was being conducted in a biased way, that the prosecution team had a very clear agenda. They wanted the results that they ultimately got, and they conducted the process in the way that they presented information, in the way that they questioned and grilled and turned around the words of witnesses, that it was very clear what they wanted to have happen. And again, I would say in general, like, the folks who went through this process, just personally, from my experience with them, they're not people who are prone to exaggerate, and they're people who understand the law. Jared Goldstein, who's a associate dean of Roger Williams Law School,
right?
They understand how these systems are supposed to work. Mm-hmm. So that's number one, that we see, and we've seen this across the country, a different standard between what you or I, and particularly, what we might see immigrants or people of color in our state, their treatment by our criminal justice system, and the treatment of law enforcement, even in this case, privatized law enforcement. So that's, that just the concept of equal protection under the law, that's really disturbing. Number two, and this references the point that you made, I think a lot of people are frankly frightened about the signal that this sends to everyone out there who saw it. not for nothing, we're living at a moment in history when hate crimes, when politically incited or fueled violence is a real concern. Heather Hires, she is never going to wake up again because someone drove their truck into a crowd because they didn't agree with what was happening politically. And so to send a signal right now to folks out there that that theoretically they can take the same action. They could literally drive a truck into a crowd of folks they don't agree with on camera, in front of the media, in front of lawyers, all of the things that happened with us on August 14th, and get away scot-free with no consequences. That's a chilling signal. And then that connects to the third, I think, danger of this, which is the impact it could have on suppressing folks' exercise of their First Amendment rights. Mm-hmm. Someone who's been very involved in Never Again, her name's Ellen. She's incredible. She's a 73-year-old woman. She's been doing this, she's been doing activism her whole life. She was involved in the anti-war movement, the nuclear non-proliferation movement. She's been around the block many times. And this week, she said to me, this is the first time out of all of the activism, all of the protests that I've been to over the years, this is the first time that I'm actually feeling kind of scared and might think twice next time before coming out. So for all of these reasons, we think this is a really bad outcome. We know that the old saying is that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. The prosecutorial team has huge discretion to make to present the case and make what they want to have happen. And apparently in Rhode Island, there's one standard for you and me, and even ham sandwiches, and there's another standard for law enforcement.
No, absolutely. This needed to go to trial, and then the trial process, by definition, amongst in front of a jury of peers, I think would have been I'll throw back to my high school English, but it would have been a cathartic experience for folks in the activism crowd because they needed to have their day in court. And then, in fact, if the gentleman was found innocent, you will at least have had the opportunity to have that day in court. And here's to me what's especially chilling. I'm old enough now to have lived through and witnessed the war on drugs, and organizations like Jump Out Boys here in Providence and across the nation. Broken glass policing, everything. I've seen that firsthand. I lived in New York City during that time. We were watching, if you will, the war on immigration, the war on that's going on. We're watching the war on sex workers, and we're seeing a pattern where the law enforcement community in this nation is using the court system, if you will, to whitewash their sins. And what folks need to start understanding, that the oldest cliche in the civil rights book is that if I'm not doing anything wrong, what can happen? Well, guess what, folks? A lot can happen, and ultimately, that standard line about I watched them do, and no one said anything, and then I watched. We know what happens. It moves throughout the food chain. We all ultimately, if we continue to allow elements of law enforcement to empower themselves above the citizenry, then at some point in time they will come for you, and they will come for me. And shows like this, where you and I can, despite our political differences, can have frank and honest conversations about the status of law enforcement here in our own hometown, will cease to exist because of that same fear. Because they will slowly take away the real estate that is our civil rights, constitutes our civil rights. And that's what everyone needs to be afraid of. You don't have to be a member of a marginalized community to all of a sudden wake up one day in the prison pipeline. You just don't.
Right. And Pat, I have to get running, but there's the last point that I'd love to make is, the Providence Journal reported that, according to Captain Woodworth, the person who was driving the truck, according to his lawyer, he's going to be, considering whether to reapply and try to get his job back at the Wyatt. And that really highlights, I think, the main issue here, which is that if this institution, as part of this larger anti-immigration system, is willing to unleash this kind of violence against, nonviolent protesters in front of cameras, in front of lawyers, in front of the news media, if they're willing to do that, and by the way, face no consequences, what can we imagine is happening behind those walls, where it is a black box, where there's no transparency, there's no lawyers, there's no media cameras, and the people are ICE detainees who have absolutely no power to speak up or fight back when there's violence happening or other inhumane conditions. So that, I think, that should really be the bottom line here, is what we experienced, the fear that folks like Ellen and others in our group experienced this last week. That is just the palest, shadow of a sliver of what our immigrant neighbors are dealing with every single day, of the violence that folks behind those walls are experiencing, of the fear that families in our state who are forced to live in the shadows are having to experience. And so that is why we are not giving up this fight. I think we had Never Again had an organizing meeting yesterday with dozens, maybe 30, 40 of our coordinators together, and the feeling in the room was, we are more determined than ever. We are going to be going back to the Wyatt. We're going to be going back to the State House. We are not going to let them intimidate or scare us, and we're going to keep fighting until our immigrant brothers and sisters, who, as you said, are doing what they're doing for their family, for the most patriotic American kind of values and reasons you can think of, until they can have the same kind of safety and security that we would want for every single Rhode Islander.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Aaron. I know you got to go. Thank you so very, very much for joining us. I'd love to have you in studio sometime soon, or even have a cup of coffee, and we'll go live somewhere from someplace to continue the conversation. Give my best to the folks, and I'm going to try to make sure that I'm at your next protest. So thanks for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, and I'll definitely like to take you up on that cup of coffee.
All right.
All right. Have a great night. Bye.
Thank you so very much. Folks, that was Aaron Regunberg. Of course, he, former state representative, now human rights activist. Folks, I'm a libertarian. I don't believe really in borders. I'll just admit that. That makes me an open borders person, doesn't it? Well, yes, it does. Because fundamentally, I see the ultimate human right being that of the ability to move freely. I believe in the free exchange of people, ideas, and commerce. And that's just not a throwaway line for me. That's what I live now. It's taken me a long time to wake up to that reality and to realize that. And I have to thank a lot of my libertarian friends for kind of coaching me along. But now I see it as clearly as one can. And again, if you just have to put yourself in the position of these folks, for whom many live truly a life of damnation. We've seen what's happened just this past week in Mexico, in Chile, around Latin and Central America, a great deal of which has to do with our American foreign policy and our policy on drugs. We broke it. We own it. Let's fix it. We're going to take a quick break right now. Joining me at the top of the hour, 8 o'clock, we'll go into the Libertarian Hour. A gentleman by the name of Joshua Smith will be joining me via the miracle of Skype telephone. We're going to talk with him about his candidacy for the chairmanship of the Libertarian Party. We're going to talk about immigration. We are the coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where links to, well, we're working on the cosmetics on the YouTube page, and we're working on getting the stuff up on the podcast page, but where links to all this can be found, as well as we're doing everything we can on our little Liberty News page to amplify organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, organizations like we just spoke with, to continue to bypass, if you will, do an end around, a roundabout, a lazy mass media. I don't subscribe to a lot of the conspiracy theories that my friends do about the media. I just find them to be remarkably lazy and short-sighted. Anyway, stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes.